This is going to be recorded for podcast, so please turn off your cell phones or anything else you might have that makes a racket. We want to make sure that your Jay-Z ringtone doesn't interrupt the poems. So we've got three wonderful readers tonight. Marcus Wicker, James Arthur, who I do not see James, he's got to be in here, so there he is, sorry. James Arthur and Matt Guenette. And they're actually going to read in that order. There are books for sale out front by all three writers. So if you don't have them already, get them because you're going to be facing a stampede afterward. Thanks so much for coming out to the River Styx reading tonight. It's really great to see everybody. I'm going to introduce Marcus, and then my co-director and the big boss of River Styx, Richard Newman, will come up and introduce James when it's time. I have a title here. It says Marcus Wicker Introduction, right? Marcus Wicker. Because we have three readers tonight, I'm going to stick to the script instead of making things up like I usually do. Marcus Wicker is our first reader, and even though he received his MFA recently from Indiana University, he is a baller already. His book, Maybe the Saddest Thing, was selected by D.A. Powell for the National Poetry Series and was published last year, right, by on Harper Perennial in October. He is a recipient of the 2011 Ruth Lilly Fellowship, and he's held fellowships from Cave Canem, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and at Indiana University, which is where he got his MFA. Wicker's work appeared in many amazing journals, Poetry, Beloit, Third Coast, Ninth Letter, among others. He is currently an assistant professor of English at the University of Southern Indiana and the poetry editor of the Southern Indiana Review. So when I said that Marcus was a baller, I didn't mean that he shoots teardrop three-pointers, even though at dinner it sounded like he might maybe get it. Yeah, I think he has a little game, right? I mean, he has very quickly carved himself a space in the contemporary poetic conversation through his imaginative language, imagistic honesty, and awareness of the poetic potential in pop culture. This is the cover of his book. It's got Bruce Lee on it, Flavor Flav, and speakers. I mean, that's it right there, right? It's amazing. In a recent interview in the Minnesota Review, Marcus listed several poets, including Tim Siebels, Claudia Rankine, and Tony Hoagland, who dialogue with pop culture and raised the idea of being pop cultural friendly. And I thought that was a really interesting phrase for Marcus to use. It certainly describes the man himself. He's a capacious poet, one who finds equal value in Larry Levis and Flavor Flav. His work in and out of traditional forms, including epistolary poems, these love letters too, which I hope he'll read a few of tonight, written to Pam Grier, Bruce Leroy, and Dave Chappelle, among others. Bruce Leroy, right? That's what I mean. And this is, it takes a baller to use one of the oldest forms in writing to talk about Bruce Leroy. And if you don't know who Bruce Leroy is, he was the bad guy in the movie The Last Dragon, which was a long time ago. How old were you when that came out, Marcus? 2. You always wanted to be Bruce Leroy. But as you'll hear, Marcus's poems balance the expectations and needs of poetry with the expectations and needs of the poet. He digs Pam Grier, so she's in a poem. He marvels at Larry Levis, so he's in a poem. And that, my friends, is what makes jaw-dropping verse. Please welcome Marcus Wicker.
I want to thank Adrian for that nice introduction and River Styx for having me here. This is such a great series and a good space. Thank you. I appreciate it. I know Valentine's Day is over, but I'm still in the mood. So I hope you'll let me read you a couple of love letters. All right? I'll start with this. There's an epigraph from Langston Hughes. We know we are beautiful and ugly too. This is a love letter to Flavor Flav. I think I love you. How you suck fried chicken grease off chalkboard fingers in public, or walk the wrong way down an escalator with a clock around your neck. How you rapped about the poor with a gold-toothed grin, how your gold teeth spell your name, how you love your name is beautiful. You shout your name 100 times each day. They say, if you repeat something enough, you can become it. I'd like to know. Does Flav or Flav sound ugly to you? I think it's slightly beautiful. Tell the truth. When you find plastic Viking horns or clown shades staring back, is it beauty you see or vaudeville? To express myself honestly enough, that, my friend, is very hard to do. Those are Bruce Lee's words. I mention Bruce Lee here only because you remind me of him. That's a lie. But your shades do mirror a mask he wore, his Green Hornet's trusty sidekick. No, I'm not calling names. Chuck D would have set cities on fire had you let him. You were not Public Enemy's sidekick. You hosed down whole crowds in loudmouth flame retardant spit. You did this only by repeating your name. I think I love you. I think I really might mean it this time. William. Can I call you William? I should have asked 27 lines ago. What have you become? How you've lived, saying nothing save the same words each day is a kind of freedom or beauty. Please, tell me I'm not lying to us. It's not going to stop. There's love in this book. This is a love letter to RuPaul, one of my favorites. You have one of the longest, thickest, most veined, colossal set of hands that I have ever seen, and frankly, they cast a spell on me. Not that I'm the type of man who goes around checking out other men's hands, but I know tightly tucked cuticles when I see them. Even sexier is the hourglass-shaping chokehold you can put on a mic. You could hurl a 2-foot monkey wrench at a mirror, or pull out and push in a date's chair with the flick of a wrist. I bet you don't, though. I bet you've never carried a man up 4 flights of stairs, limp arms flailing every which way. And if you have, I bet you took care to cradle his neck, to avoid banisters, and to walk slowly because you are fierce in the way only a 6'7" black drag queen could be. In one of my earliest memories, you were wearing a pink sequin dress, endorsing a hamburger, good enough for a man, maybe a woman. I am a black man who has never worn pink. Not a polo to a country club, not gaiters to a church, and still, that commercial ravished me. How hard to be sandwiched between what and who you are, tickled by every cruel wind critic voyeur playing rough beneath your skirt. How raw you must be to sit before a camera, legs uncrossed. So I love stand-up comedians because I think that poets and stand-up comedians share a lot in common in terms of truth-telling, but also in terms of timing. And one of my favorites is Richard Pryor. In the mid-'80s, he lit himself on fire while freebasing cocaine. And then a couple of months later, after he was recovered, he went on stage and he gave this sort of wonderful naked performance afterwards. And it wrecked me in the most beautiful way. And so this poem starts after I watched that performance. It's self-dialogue, watching Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip. What of stepping outside the door on fire? What of running down a faceless road, let alone a busy strip inflamed? God damn, there must be 10,000 cells in an epidermis. Imagine yours. Imagine the freedom to say, God damn, to consider what that feels like, to speak a wild geyser spraying from a busted hydrant. You watch Richard Pryor in a loud fire engine red suit, all flashing lights, sirens, 10,000 cells visible to the world, and consider what that feels like. To think you may or may not be goddamned. To know at least your Johnson's intact. $1998. Maybe it's the half-communion wafer yellow moon in my eye. Maybe it's the thug wind, mingling fragrant herb, firing shots across the synapse that takes me back to summer, outcast, return of the G. I was a bone, head caught between middle and high, private and public school. Me and B used to run the drain in his father's fifths a crown. Used to do C-sections on Swisher Sweets, talk shit about Rodney's chipmunk teeth, and deep down I must have been aching to knock one out. Me and B were rocking back and forth on plastic porch chairs when Ipsy's #1 gossip approached. Sheila said Rodney was talking reckless about my younger brother. I inhaled a pulsing red fist from the midsection, blew smoke through bull nostrils, knew exactly what to do. We placed a few calls, told every teen on the block they should come to the park around noon. I grabbed my pigskin, set teams of 5. B snapped a short bullet pass to Rodney, and 5 guys nailed his back to grass, rained down sharp laughs and elbows to ribs, teed off on his groin. I tried to drill a hole in his face, blasted my knuckles against his incisors again and again and again, and I can't go on talking to you this way any longer. All this time, I've been working up something to say about that liminal place between manhood and cartoon cool, something stupid like that. Rodney, I chased you through cul-de-sacs and lawns, chased you west through the state of Michigan, and still haven't figured out how to finish this letter. I just want you to know. And I understand this is no consolation, but every time I'm in the heat of a huddle, in a gym or barber shop, when I swig cold brews and watch mob flicks by myself, Rodney, you chase after me, you kick my ass, you nail me square to the ground. I'm gonna bring it up. Not yet, but I'm gonna bring it up a little. Sometimes I wonder if observing the world for my poetry, if I've forgotten how to live in the world, right? Like is every moment just new fodder for my next poem? And that's where this piece starts. I'm a sad, sad man. So sad, I can't remember how to ride a bus right. Just the other day, I forgot who I was and couldn't budge to help a human in need because the pen in my pocket was poking my thigh saying, use me, use them, write their stories. As if I am not them, that woman and her 2 little girls, mounting some 10-ton thing daily, fair or no fair, rust bucket but not broken down, traveling at a pace beyond my control. And how sad it is, because I'm really not them. Most days, I keep at least $1 in my pocket to pay the driver, and if not, a briefcase which says I'm good for it. That was somehow miserable to admit. I'm only telling you this because you're hearing a poem, probably spend perfectly good bar nights feeling the world deeply with the ballpoint pen in your pocket, and though a tad abnormal to discuss, all humans want to understand everything and for everyone to understand us. What I can't understand is what makes me see differently any 3 people on a bus. Maybe the saddest thing in the world is not knowing how to feel cold plastic bus seats without thinking of narrative arc, the 10,000 pains shifting uncomfortably from cheek to raw red cheek, and at any given moment, this. You all right out there? Okay, just checking on. As you probably noticed from the first couple of poems, I like pop culture and I like it more than I should as a poet, probably. I watch a little too much TV. And because I watch too much TV, I have this thing about characters named Marcus, right? So like if you turned on TBS right now and you see a cat like sprinting from a bank with a ski mask on, his name is Marcus. If you see a guy who's like behind on his child support, his name's probably Marcus. This annoys me to no end, and so I wrote a guzzle about it. It's called Self-Dialogue with Marcus. In every movie, There's a snaggletooth thug who pimps broken speech, or a snob poodle who shits for a living, named Marcus. It's like Marcus is the sleeping infant who weeps without fail while you're tonguing her navel by starlight. Fuck every Marcus. He's why you sail the whole punch keel to nowhere you've never been. Rastas love Garvey. Raised Methodist, died Catholic. Ask Marcus to name a market for his prayers. Miller's no better. His bass music's fairly funky, but he'd write in couplets too. Marcus, who did this to you? Mr. Schenkenberg, who says this CK brief package is right? Why not Freeball? It's gotta be Marcus, meaning Mars or Ares in Rome. Today, you got spacesuit high in your underwear to declare self-war. That's just like Marcus Aurelius pinning that progressive Tinder self-help text, then stoning 10,000 Christians. Empire was his Marcus for that. In Marcus, Iowa, there's one market, 5 churches, and a kid who can't absolve his bass axe Jones. What's his Marcus? Tell me that. You can't tell what's homestead or honed to save your life. Nights you shrivel through a rib in your yacht's gut, and though Marcus can rarely swim in film, still you live to drown another day, and the Marcus for this Marcus is most certainly Marcus. I've worked at a couple of literary magazines, and I realized that poets are really great at keeping up with the Joneses, right? So one submission period, it'd be all poems about pomegranates, right? Or in one season, I was reading for Indiana Review, and it was the season of the Aubade. It was like every poem that I read was this overly detailed, ornate Aubade. And if you don't know, an Aubade is a mourning song written for lovers departing. And they're very popular in contemporary American poetry. And so I wrote this poem making fun of the Aubade, and then it turned into something else. Something happened. It's called Interrupting Aubade, Ending an Epiphany. Could I call this poem an Aubade if I wrapped it in fragrant tissue paper? If I locked this morning in the mine safe deposit box and polished it 66 times per day, until the sky's description noted the number of feathers on a sparrow's left wing and the crabgrass jutting from his uppity beak. I once wrote a poem about a fruit fly orgy in a grape's belly. Its crescendoed combustion was supposed to represent the speaker's feelings for a wife named Joy. That poem never really worked out. This poem is aware of its mistakes and doesn't care. This poem wants to be a poem so bad, it'll show you a young, smitten pair poised in an S on a downy bed. The man inhales the woman's sweet hair, and whole fields of honeysuckle and jasmine bloom inside him. He inhabits a breath like an anodyne, and I think I could call this poem an Aubade if it detailed new breath departing his mouth. I think I could get away with that, because who knows what that even means. Maybe I mean that's safer than saying it straight, like, this is about the woman I'll marry. How one summer she hit snooze 4 times each sunrise. This is about her smiling and nodding off and smiling and listening to me mumble into the back of her perfect freckled shoulder about anything but poetry. And this morning at my desk, in the midst of a breath, I remember not every moment needs naming. I know precisely what to call this. You okay if I read you some new poems? Yeah. Okay, all right. They sound a little different from the poems that I read before, so don't be scared. Any LL Cool J fans in the room? Okay, cool. I said that once at an old folks home and it didn't go over. It did not go over. All right. When I'm alone in my room, sometimes I stare at the wall, and in the back of my mind, I hear my conscience call me Ishmael. Call me sailor, but not captain. Call me fishhook, clean. Call me multi-purpose fish scale weighing self-obsession. Call me fish tail in a siren's silk sheets. thief in the night, buccaneer. Call me multi-purpose fist scale singing motherfucker, then calling it good. Call me lukewarm algae eater, upchucked. Call me match head struck against hollow whale walls. Call me faith's phosphorus irritation. The Bible study leading SeaWorld trainer dead between Shamu's teeth. Call me Freightliner Hall, hacking through a baby humpback, extinct and extinguished, son of a slave girl, expelled to the desert for being himself. Call me Miracle, opposite Mirage, 3-part sea but bountiful land. Call me mangy pasture, wild buffalo, archer, arrow. Call me sheared, call me back to the shepherd, call me lamb. I've been writing about suburbia a lot lately, right? So like anti-odes to the Uzi sprinkler head and hermetically sealed lawn. But I've also been writing to a kind of higher power too. These very self-indulgent praise poems and prayer poems. And I thought on the way over here, it'd be pretty dangerous to read those poems in a tavern. But also, I need to read them here. This is the place where I should get them out. So here are a couple. The way we were made. But you made every delicate, elegant wrist and glistening ankle. But you made them beautiful in braided rope and dime store gold. But you made every necklace clasp. But you made them caress the nape like an errant wind after a shower. But you made every eyelash erotic. Every single strand of hair soft. But you made them from dust and bone, made every glorious singing thigh, every button nose. But you made them with holes, wide open, to the faintest hints of salt in a sea breeze, salt in the sweaty mouth of a navel, salt in the blood, sweet in every wrong way. This was like my manifesto for a while. It's called Prayer on Aladdin's Lamp. Grant me shelter and bread. Grant me porch ledge, mantle, scented candles, bed. Grant me 4 walls, a 5-foot fridge, and a hall. And maybe 4 more walls. Yes, 4 more walls and a desk. And a decent laptop plus pleather rolling chair so that I might sit and write you a poem, Lord. A psalm praising all you've given, air I sing with, crickets falsetto, buzzing bees and nectar, how chrysanthemum feels on the tongue is what you are to me. You see what I am doing here? You see, I am being so sincere, sire, which is sad. Still, grant me a few free hours each day. Grant me a moleskine pad and a ballpoint pen with some mass. Grant me your gift of this voice, pages and pages of this voice, and a good book from a loving press. And grant me a great love too. Grant a way to provide for my love, like a tenure-track job at a small college in the Midwest. The kind with poems and papers to read, with hoodies running in and out of my office, deadlines, paychecks, and an okay 401k. Grant me everything, Lord, not today, but before 28. Be bulldozer, genie. Let every prayer avalanche me into dusk, blank matter, debris. Make me worthy, oh Lord, make me me. Got one more for you here. Begins with an epigraph from St. Paul. Pray without ceasing. Plea to my jealous heart. What's funny is that you think I can stop praying. That you think I take existence, blown dandelion across the philtrum, lightly. As irresponsible bird song, as the wren, finch, chickadee, and prairie warbler, as scarlet tanager, indigo bunting, laughing gull, trumpeter swan, as common sparrows outside my window canning dervish loops, sparrows that count the air and multiply. Is all the love at all times everywhere, you think I take too much in. You think I take communion wine for granted. Sometimes the other wine touches me sweetly and you know it. All the time you know it. This and how communion wine indebts me. As the man granted new eyes on a hiking trip, how when his boot met wet dune, he felt the sinking in. And still you think I can stop praying? How hummingbird, how sailfish, mother of pearl moth, little dragonfly, old faithful greyhound, oh elephant herd in a room of rodents, how you have me delirious, haggard, hungrier, to hear you at all times if it'll keep you redlining reverently. That's how I love you most. As stethoscope, not scalpel. As ever-flickering filament, not chitojoin key. Forgive me, a sinner afraid of lightning, but when I ask you out, oh whistling tailpipe, you suck air from lungs. I inhale and need you, and you know it, as whisper, as hum, as trained wind and storm, you show yourself no matter my asking. And when I ask, oh elegant cyclone, you know my blood bones. You know my slow capacity for recovery. What's funny is I feel bad for that, and you think I can stop praying? When my lover locks our pinkies in a crowded art gallery, I praise the body. Praise every kissable knuckle, every painstakingly etched wave and a fingerprint, and you think I could take a host for granted, oh center of every body? Oh, all-knowing ebless Red Sea, I want to look in your face and live this beautifully always. Oh, metacarpal, proximal, oh, distal phalange, all-powerful finger in a breastplate, touch me light as a feather, please. Jog in place. Thanks.
Thanks, you, Marcus. You're right about that, too. The Marcus name. The poetry of James Arthur defies easy categorization. He flirts with formal poetry, but he's not a traditionalist. And yet his sense of rhythm and music and structure, as well as his sneaky rhymes, probably make him reluctant to consider himself a free-verse poet. He isn't afraid to write about the big subjects, yet he knows enough about poetry that it's often the small things, onions and turnips and silly bicycles, that comprise them. He has a penchant for the exotic, the land of Nod, or strange places where one eats scorpions and drinks cobra blood. Yet even when he writes about everyday relationships in our ordinary day-to-day world, it seems strange and exotic. James Arthur is the winner of a Discovery Nation Prize, the Amy Lowell Traveling Poetry Scholarship, a Stegner Fellowship, and fellowships to Yaddo, McDowell Colony, and the Amy Clampett House. James published his debut poetry collection, Charms Against Lightning, which is for sale right outside there, courtesy of Left Bank Books, last year with Copper Canyon. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The American Poetry Review, Rattle, Poetry, The New Republic, Verse Daily, and Poetry Daily. He is currently a Hodder Fellow at Princeton University. Please welcome former River Styx poetry editor and my very good friend, James Arthur.
It's really a treat to be here, and Richard, thank you so much for having me, and Marcus and Matthew, it's really a pleasure and an honor to share the stage with you tonight. Thank you all for coming. I'm very excited to be here. It's wonderful to be back in St. Louis for a couple days. I've moved around a lot from place to place, and so many of the poems in Charms Against Lightning are about this idea of searching, moving around from one place to another, hoping that you'll finally end up someplace where you will be truly yourself and truly content. I'm sure that's a feeling that some of you know and can identify with. So this poem, first poem I'm going to read, Utopia, is about the search for some place that may not exist at all. The word utopia means both paradise and no place. Finally, he's found his own city, a postcard place that anyone would like, backlit by the romance of an unknown history. Here, sheets and hair perfume the air. Every gate is hammered silver, every song a song and dance, and the balloon seller bares her ivory shoulder for a kiss. The man, who's spent enormously to feed a fantasy of being from no place, spent what he had and borrowed more, now is completely happy, except for an idea of an idea that he cannot outpace, that somehow he may have missed something that he should not have missed. Though no doubt this is better than lying on a cold suburban beach, admiring stars so far away he'd be seeing them as they were before the dawn of human speech. This is another country, not an ordinary place, where a man, no matter how exceptional he felt, would finally be erased.
Wow.
Thank you. The next poem is also about wandering, and it's based on a story that I'm sure many of you know, the story of Cain and Abel. According to tradition, after Cain murders his brother Abel, he's sent east into Nod. And I think for a long time, scholars tried to figure out where Nod was, where precisely Cain had been sent, and have only recently come to the conclusion that Nod meant something entirely different. So this poem is called The Land of Nod. Growing up, I barely knew the Bible, but read and reread the part when Cain drifted east, or was drawn that way, into a place of desolation, the land of Nod. There to begin with a wife of unknown origin, another race of men, under the mark of God. As a boy, I thought Nod would be a place where the blue scillas would bloom gray, a country of the rack and screw, the serrated sword, where the very serving cups were bone. As a grown man, I've heard that Nod never was a nation, of Cain's offspring or anyone, but a mistranslation of wander. So Cain could go wherever and be in Nod. Far more than in God, I believe in Cain, who destroyed his own brother, and therefore, in any city, could have his wish and be alone. For a lot of my life, less so now, but a lot, particularly when I was younger, I really struggled to control my relationship with alcohol. So this poem contains two short silences that I think of as blackouts. The poem's called Drinking Song. She and her hat came over. She crossed her legs in the sun, her sheer hands in the gloves they wear. She came over smelling of wine. Nothing of hers being yours to accept or decline. She said, and a ship groaned in the boatyards to the west, heard by a backhoe, its jaw to the ground, and it couldn't dig its own grave. She was all switchgrass and began to sway, and she said, and on came the pollen engine, the injury machine, talking double time between every tick. Nothing of hers being yours to accept or decline. She came over, her purse full of codeine and cigarettes and twine. I don't know about you guys, but I have a lot of friends who talk about back in the day. And I think that they often use the phrase to mean some point in history, but they're not exactly sure when it was. Maybe it was the 1940s, maybe it was the 1890s, maybe it was the 1970s. They're not exactly clear on when back in the day was, but they know it was at some point. And maybe it was when men wore hats. Every man wore a hat back in the day. So this poem is about back in the day. It's called In a Parallel Universe. I mean, back in the day, said the face, meaning before he was born, when no one carried a phone, but people had them at home. Or before then, pre-Kennedy, pre-Nixon, when streetcars were unknown and the young men whose sons would storm foxholes in World War I spent so much time standing around smoking. To go far away, you went by boat or train, and the near of today was far away, and you died in the town you were born in. Said the face, I'm not saying things were better back then. As well as he knew anything, he knew as long as there's been a then and a now, there's been someone to say the world was better back when. And I am not saying so, he said. I know there never was any Eden. But back in the day, if word had come down of Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, it would never have crossed your mind that the whole thing, the small step, the leap for mankind, was a lie filmed on a subterranean soundstage. I'm going to read a few poems about fatherhood. The first one I wrote before I actually was a father. It's called, but I kind of knew it was coming my way. This poem is called Fatherhood. Someday, I'd like to have a daughter and give her a stuffy name that she'd hate. She and I could go galumphing out to a pond and net minnows she'd briefly keep alive. A serious, small person, a lover of ribbons and toboggans, of talking, waistcoat-wearing otters. She and I would rake up every leaf in November. Am I such a sap? Forgive me. Maybe I know more about sons. If I had one, I'd expect him to fling any tenderness back on my plate, to say, you're nudging me into the grave when I'm telling him to live, to not forgive, forget all but the worst of what I say, and magnify his victories to win my love. I now have a son. This poem is called Disharmonic Love Song. Every day of this September is one that my newborn son won't remember. Aromatic pines full of growth, without intent, meaning what they've always meant, are shucking off their needles in the wind. My wife and I sing lullabies, but there's no pattern that our son can find in a dryer's rumpus or a kitchen light. On, off, on. When his mother leaves the room, she may as well have left forever. God knows if the man into whom the boy will grow has been forecast in the embryo or is somehow self-defining. A long lifetime ago, our son, born early, would have died. So we gave him a strong name to make him strong. A son. I had no inkling that I wanted one. Sometimes I dream that he's back in his glass box, drawing filtered oxygen. I normally read my poems from memory, but this is a brand new one that I don't yet have from memory, so I'm going to have to read this one from the page. It's based on a children's book that I'm sure some of you know, either as parents or maybe you remember it yourselves as kids. The poem is called Goodnight Moon. I used to be as unsentimental as anyone could be. Now I'm almost absurd, a clown, carrying you on my shoulders around and around Palmer Square, through the cold night air as stores lock up and begin closing down. Good night, fair trade coffee. Good night, expensive shoes. Good night, soon, my little son. You're a toothy 2-foot-something sumo, a giddy, violent elf, jabbing your finger at the moon, which you've begun noticing in the last week or two. Moom, moom. For you, the word ends with a mumming as it begins. Sometimes it seems every night is goodnight moon. Sometimes I think of the one other child your mother and I conceived, who'd now be reading and teaching you to read. We threw that child away when he or she was the size of a watermelon seed. And the last poem I'm going to read for you, and before I do, I just want to thank you again. It's really been a pleasure, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you again for coming out and for listening. The last poem I'm going to read, I wrote about a time in my life in Seattle when I was pretty depressed, and I wasn't sure if I was going to keep living. And I was caught in a downpour, and an ergonomic bicycle went by. And an ergonomic bicycle, in case any of you are unfamiliar with the ergonomic bicycle, or the recumbent bicycle as it's sometimes known, is a bicycle that allows the cyclist's feet to be elevated slightly in front and head to be tipped back a little bit, so the bicyclist can kind of relax a little bit while going wherever he or she is going. And I was outraged that I could be so unhappy and someone else could be just riding his stupid bicycle wherever he was going. It seemed like I was being laughed at by the universe. So I knew that there was something to be said about it, but it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to say about it exactly. I think probably because I had to grow up a little bit, had to grow up enough to see that I was not the center of the universe. So this poem is called Distracted by an Ergonomic Bicycle. On a rainy morning in the worst year of my life, as icy islets shelled the street, I shared a tremor with a Doberman leashed to a post. We two were all the world until a bicyclist shot by, riding like a backward birth, feet first, in level, gentle ease, with the season's hard breath between his teeth. The rain was almost ice, the sky mild and pale. I saw a milk carton bobbing by on a stream of melting sleet. A bicyclist. A bicyclist. He rode away to his home, I guess. I went home, where I undressed, left my jacket where it fell, went straight to bed, and slept for 2 days straight. But those clicking wheels kept clicking in my head. And though I can't say why, I felt not only not myself, but that I'd never been, that I was that man I hardly saw, hurling myself into the blast, and that everything I passed, dog, rain, cold, the other guy, I left in my wake, like afterbirth. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a very short break and maybe 5-10 minutes or so, and then we'll be right back with poet Matthew Guenette.
So I'm going to introduce Matt Guenette, who's standing here very patiently waiting. He's checking his phone, playing on Facebook.
I'm nervous.
He's the final reader of the night, and he is SIUC Carbondale's finest, Mr. Matt Guenette. Matt hails from Newport, New Hampshire, which according to him is a town known for being the birthplace of Sarah Joseph Hale, the author of the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Somehow that's not surprising to me. I've known Matt for 15 years, and every time I see him, I get that tune stuck in my head. That's not true. I've only known Matt for 14 years. He is the author of 2 books. The first, Sudden Anthem, won the 2007 American Poetry Journal Book Prize. His most recent collection, American Busboy, which is available out there, was published in 2011 by University of Akron Press. It's a wonderful book of poetry in general, but it's especially relevant for those of you that might have worked in food service, like I did, and you'll find out why here in a second. Matt was awarded the Hessen, Wisconsin Literary Fellowship and a fellowship from the Vermont Studio Center. His poems have appeared in numerous journals, too many to list, but I'll mention a few. Another Chicago Magazine, Barn Owl Review, Indiana Review, the Spoon River Poetry Review, and some others. So earlier I mentioned being a baller in reference to Marcus, and the same thing applies to Matt, only Matt is literally a basketball player. When we were in graduate school, we would play one-on-one on Sunday mornings. Sometimes we'd play against the philosophy grad students who were as bad at hoops as you'd imagine someone studying philosophy would be. I mean, they were really bad, sorry. But yeah. But mostly we played one-on-one because it was Sunday morning, right? And we were in grad school. Matt is a tenacious basketball player, and you'll see some of that tenacity in his poems. His lines are relentless, like the images in his images are imaginative enough to win a dunk contest. I'm not going to try to keep this metaphor of poetry and basketball up because Matt's poems aren't that one-dimensional. They reside in the lyric because that's where the music and surprise is. They reside in the narrative because Matt is a fabulist. Like Marcus, who we heard earlier, his poems are aware of the expectations of poetry while remaining true to the needs of the poet himself. Matt's got this poem that I hope he's going to read called Sistina Aguilera. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a Sistina about Christina Aguilera. Pulling off something like that is a feat of poetic agility most of us can't imagine. But for Matt, it's a Sunday morning on the page, just like it was a Sunday morning on the ball court. Please welcome Matt Guenette.
I'm going to read, when I read a poem off a page, this is from a new book. It's called Status Updates that I'm working on. And then I'll toggle back and forth between that and American Busboy. This poem's called Poem from Guenette the Elder to Guenette the Younger. And it's actually after Jake Adam York. It's based on one of the last conversations I had with him, the beautiful Jake Adam York, who passed away recently. We had a great night in Madison about 6 weeks before he was suddenly taken from us. A lot of drinking bourbon and having a great talk. And I tried to write a poem for Jake, but then I realized that the best thing I could do was just write a poem based on the good time I had with Jake. From Guenette the Elder to Guenette the Younger. You're an experiment in beauty, in nothingness too. You know you're a white guy, right? Have you listened to that kick-ass version of Waiting for the End of the World? Have you even listened to Elvis Costello at all? Without paperwork, your life story would sound way better. Those pangs you feel could be me sawing you in half, trying to make you disappear. Mutability, look it up. You're gonna need a good chemist. The scene where your mother says, "Don't knock up anyone or end up in jail," that didn't make the cut, but it's on the DVD. Your flaws need heroics, way more heroics. We don't deserve each other, or maybe we do. Can I get you another bourbon? How about some kids? Tantrums so epic, they're nearly Catholic. But I'm talking about you lack of sleep throwing you, wider and wider until air is pissing from a tire is what you are. Is this your essence? Only time will tattle. The kids just want to dance, don't you? Grieve like you were sucker punched, lined in the gut. None of this will be on the SATs. You know you're a white guy, right? You should probably read more. So I wrote American Busboy because I was an American and a busboy at one point. I'm still an American. And one of the things that I've noticed is that I'm a teacher. I'm really lucky to be a teacher. I didn't just notice that, I know that. But people will say, "Oh, that's really interesting. How did you become that?" And then you tell that story. When I was a busboy, nobody ever said, "Oh, that's really interesting. How did you become that?" So this poem was inspired by that phenomena, and just in general, the phenomena of doing what I would call unskilled labor and not being respected remotely for it. This is called National Flag Week. When the hostess comes out to apologize for over-fried clams, she's doing her job. Apologizing for disappointing fried clams. Apologizing for fried clams that have underachieved. Apologizing for fried clams that have lost their sense of purpose. It was determined the cheese slices stuck to the ceiling must have had their reasons. Generally, as they prepped your food, the cooks would be listening, unironically, to 80s speed metal. The locker room where your socks had gone to die. The lobster tank where now and then a lobster tried to escape, but the others would drag him back. This isn't about the flawed democracy of lobster takes, the sweaty dictatorship of managers at the bar with toothpicks in their mouths saying shit like, "You missed a spot." or the unacceptable conditions the green dumpsters worked under, wheezing blue fluid to the bay where the tourist attractions were tourists who were attractions thanks to their shitty parallel parking skills. The new rich estates along the shore looked like cheap estates trying to look like old rich estates. On the bulletin board in English and Spanish were directions for what to do if someone was choking. If you were choking in another language, too bad for you. Still, there were times bussing tables when I felt strangely free. Yet no one asks how I came to be a busboy. It was the same way anyone becomes a busboy. Someone on the inside vouched for my character. Thank you. I appreciate that. I saw this poet when I was 20 years old named Walter Butts, and it was the first poetry reading I'd gone to, and he was reading these aphoristic poems that were really funny, and a few people were laughing, and so then I guess I thought I could laugh too, and then afterwards I went up to him and said, "I didn't know you could laugh." And he said, "Kid, it was like a movie, like Mean Joe Green throwing that, you know. You guys know, right? It's like, kid, if they're not laughing or crying, you need to revise." This is called Morning After the Comet Pill. End of world seeker seeks nimble minx for lifelong love. End of world game show hosts, come on down. Message beamed into the housewife's head. End of world. I blame myself. From speeding protons near to light comes this soupy mass. How does it taste? A little fuzzy, I think, like the floor of a cab. I love Jesus's cloth-draped style. I watch Star Trek and X-Files religiously. The comet breeds a cocktail of vodka and barbiturates. Who wants a nap? Whoever they are, don't let them bite you. Aim for the head. Try to save grandma. Just follow my lead on Twitter. Don't be scared. Call in sick. What is that? A star? I want you to want me. I need you, and so on. But now that the end of the world has been postponed, you don't look so good. It's called General Attributes. About 1,000 tourists a year will choke on a busboy, according to the statistics. The mysterious waitress triangle where your service disappears. The famous grilled cheese where the busboy's face emblazons, spontaneous in buttery heat. The origins of the word are iffy at best. It means nowhere in sight, stealing your tips, seeker of the waitress panties. Your mother was a busboy. Jesus was a busboy. There have always been two kinds, the ones who distract you while you pay your bill, and the ones who find your car out in the lot and chew the rubber strips from its windows. I thought, if you were a busboy, your future was ominous as a motel at dusk. Then I read the legend where the food service workers battled the economy's giant squid to a draw. Then I became a busboy and married a waitress, just like in the opera. This poem's for Stephen Schroeder, that's that guy right there. Yeah. This is a poem that he published in Auntie called 10 Poems on Marriage Plus a Wish. This is poem number 5. My wife behaving rationally. I can't imagine anything more selfish. Hasn't she read these incoherent directions? Can't she see how powerless I am against the screws gone missing from their package? How much I'm suffering having to build this end table? Tonight it will be a wound in my dreams, an infinite column of end tables collapsing like cards. In the morning, she'll ask me to hang the blinds, like I'm not blind enough. How am I doing on time? Pam? 8 minutes. This is called Independence Day. I can picture my mother after waitressing, forever reading the entrails of her apron. In a hushed voice, she says, I'm halfway through my 30-day diet, and already I've lost 15 days. In the bleachers, at the ball game on TV, someone who looks like my father with a mustache and a tan has his arm around another woman. In a kitchen, shades of dusk, my mother is beautiful and clairvoyant, burning the fish sticks in a skirt of smoke. When my father comes home, she's holding the lamp like a hammer. She says she feels enlightened. My mother was really cool. She was really cool. This is a poem, James, you read poems about being a dad. This is a poem that I didn't know was about being a dad until I sent it to my friend Matt Hart. And he's going to publish this, will turn up in the next issue of Forklift. And he said, that's a great poem about being a dad. And I was like, yes. It is. It's called To Love, Straightforwardly and Dizzy. Our dreams can get loud and bloodier than church. Our wanderlusts need lower maintenance apologies. Some metaphors make us harder to love, like the smartest student gets harder to love once she makes you look like an ass. Should I mention the bills we're not paying? That we're sitting here drinking, listening to the Pixies for the first time on vinyl? Roses are red, violets are blue, and something is banging at the door in my chest. Whose monkey is this? And harder still not to feel afraid when just filling out forms for the kids hurts like a house. My daughter not taking shit from her brother, marching off in sunglasses bigger than her face. My son drumming everything because everything's a drum. Our brains kept alive all these years in bodies that haven't slept or danced enough, but tonight we've been blessed with Black Francis shouting debaser over and over until the word unfathoms. So let's throw down. Let's show these kids what the hell, like no one ever showed us. This is called, it's called Labor Day. There's no swears in this one. Damn. This poem, it's funny, well, there's probably a million poets in here. You guys know that a lot of times what sets you to writing is not really any idea, just an image. You see something and you go, oh, I gotta have that. And for years I was obsessed with that image in those truck stop video games of the machine that's got all those quarters in it, and they're all like, you put in another quarter and it'll push them all, and then apparently hundreds of dollars of quarters will spill over to the edge, but it never happens. It's like a physics-defying experiment. Every time I saw one of those, I just couldn't believe it, and I couldn't resist it either. So this poem is based on that image. Even clouds were dirty tables, tables you could pass your hands through. The managers' wagging tongues insisted on having here and now meetings, but they were always postponed to the there and then. The food service gods or rats or whatever took my picture, cut off the head, and stuck it on a peanut butter jar high behind the line where the cooks could laugh at it freely. They called it fat baby head peanut butter. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, the lot was parked with a total lack of grace. The edge of a word is another word's shadow is about the best thing that I ever overheard. And the advice of dandelion heads exploding, the terrible whisper of those polyester pants. On my answering machine for days would be nothing but a waitress laughing, like a flower pot falling from a ledge. Fat baby head peanut butter was fine. I could live with that. But then someone posted in the waitress station a missing persons flyer with my name on it, asking had anyone seen me. There were aliases, asshole, flounder, snot-nosed, punk, and the claim I was known to masturbate furiously in all capital letters, Furiously, like there was any other way. One whole wall in the restaurant was mirrored. If you paid attention, you could actually see when a busboy turned away from his image. A mirrored wall doesn't prove you exist, but it doesn't prove you don't. The waitress whose legs put the yes in my eyes, in the small of her back, a 4-letter word, so I said so. It was the beginning of summer's end, and I was nothing and lucky. At the gas station after work, I dropped a quarter in that machine where a wave of quarters was encrusting impossibly at the edge. I'll do 2 more. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to do 1 more. This poem is called Transverse. It's from my mother, who was awesome and was published by Southwester by Adrian. Thank you for choosing it, Adrian and Richard and James and Marcus. Thank you tonight for this wonderful event and letting me be a part of it. Transverse. Wear a tutu or get poison sumac just once and everyone remembers the look on your face. If the password is Sue saw 7 sleek seals, it's a good time. I hope you remember. I remember my mother loved lilacs and the cockatiel she trained to say, "Here, kitty, kitty." When darkness settles, the deeper beauty illumines, memorized in the stained glass. After a few minutes, boiling water remembers the dumplings to float to the top like a thought. If you can remember, your ass is grass, Guenette. You and I are probably related. She smiled, reminded of how, like lovers, the cats would spat with the jays. If they say the premise is simple, probably there's a thing or two they forgot. Maybe not. I swear to God, my mother said, reaching down with both hands, grabbing my shoulders in a dream. She could remember nothing like it, the government just giving her money for being sick. From the Stone Age of mixtapes, you might remember yesterday, walking hand in hand. You might remember a faded sign by the side of the road saying 15 miles to the Love Shack. You might remember not being the brightest crayon in the box. That's called a historical inevitability, lest we forget. Will I ever forget seeing her get thinner and weak? I remember ideas and sensations, said Joyce, pretty much speaking for everybody. By the time you remember you have to swim back, your legs should feel like Jell-O. There is no shore. There is no swimming back. Mother, I remember your face. Thank you.
So we started doing this Q&A thing after our readings, and it's been going pretty well. So we have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions since we had 3 readers tonight.
Should we stand on the piano?
You'll come up here. Okay. I know it's tempting. Do we have a couple questions? Some people said they had some questions. Yeah, back there.
I have a question for James. About your composition process. Just, could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. As much as possible, I write the poems just in my head while walking around. I find that if I sit down in front of a laptop or even in front of a sheet of paper, I tend to follow one chain of thought too doggedly, and that going for a walk and just talking to myself, my poems are pretty short, so it's not as if I need to keep a huge amount of information in my head at one time. It's usually just chewing over 3 or 4 lines at a time, and so I'll just say them over and over in different variations on them and get the sound pattern to lead me from one word or phrase to the next. And when I feel that I have a sort of a critical mass of phrases, then I sit down at a computer usually, or sometimes at a sheet of paper, and just move them around until they start to take on a sort of a collective identity. Does that answer your question?
100%.
Okay.
Another question?
Well, then a follow-up to that question. So then how do you decide the question I had watching you, you kept referring to reading your poems, and you were the one reader who wasn't reading their poems. So how do you decide what you commit to memory so that you can do this?
I try to commit them all. The only reason that newer one I just wrote last week, so I don't.
I guess I mean, like, what about poems that haven't worked? Like, do you remember poems that didn't work out?
Yep. Maybe even better. maybe they're the ones I know best. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there another question? Yeah.
This is for all of you. Actually comes from Chris's question. Sort of, I enjoyed the contrast between the 3 different reading styles. Obviously very different and all good. So if any of you want to talk about how you came by your reading style, if it was something you consciously came by.
Okay.
The Pixies. You're easy.
Yeah. Well, Marcus talked a lot about comedy. What talks about comedy, and a lot of times when I've been really lucky to do a lot of readings, and people say, who did you read or what influenced you, and I know that they want me to say Dickinson and Whitman or something like that, which is true. But what really got me interested in language were comics, and I remember being a little kid in one of those glorious wood-paneled 80s basements with AC/DC posters on the wall, and my older brother and a friend of his listening to George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Steve Martin's Comedy Is Not Pretty, and those are iconic memories for me. And that kind of engagement with the audience really followed me into the performative aspect of reading. And for me, there is a performative aspect to reading. I think all 3 poets would attest to that, to be someone else other than yourself. But also, in particular, when I was finishing American Busboy, I started becoming enamored with some of the poets out of the Chicago performance scene, someone like Robbie Q. Telfer, for instance. And I loved how they were so interested in their audience. Like, it was really important for their audience to feel like this was worth their night, to come out to be entertained in some way, not just to be given something that's thoughtful and interesting, but to have this entertaining element. So that was a big part of what it kind of fed my idea of what it means to be able to stand up and have the privilege to stand in a room like this and read from the work that I've been lucky enough to have time to make. I wanted to have a reading that felt as close to the things that I've liked, like concerts or music or stand-up comics. And I know that I'm not any of those things, but I think that poets are working in that, minding that same vein. So that was something that I've always been conscious of. And of course, Steve, you've been to readings where you go and hear a poet who you love, and they're like, I will now read my poem.
Not looking.
Yeah. It's incredibly serious, and you will listen reverently. And those kind of readings just they turned me off. They made me think I could have gone to the movies that night, or, I could have gone out, when I was a teenager. I could be out vandalizing right now. So it's really important for me to feel like that performative element is there, because I want to feel acknowledged as an audience member, and I try to do that as a reader as well.
You're tall. Oh, wow, you're very tall. I started writing first in slam, and a lot of the performers that I was attracted to initially were these very boisterous people who seem to know what to do with their hands, and I don't. But I always thought if I could deliver a poem audibly so that you can hear me, but also try and channel the state that I was in when I wrote the poem initially. I always trust the impetus, right? So whatever led me to the poem, if I think I'm in my desk, I'm alone, I'm rocking back and forth as I write it, I need to try and do the same thing for you. So that's half of it, at least. That's the short answer.
I'd mostly just second what Marcus and Matthew just said. I don't give a lot of thought to performing the poem exactly, but I try to, what I do give a lot of thought to is making it clear, reading slowly and trying to include enough information between the poems that people are well set up for the poem, well set up to hear the poem and absorb it, or absorb the majority of it on one listening. But I don't. A lot of the emotion is not performed so much as relived, as I'm sure you all. I'm sure you've experienced that too if you've read your own work, or if you've ever performed in a play. It's very easy when you're speaking these words. Somehow it's very easy to fall into the emotions that the words express. And I find that when I'm reading my poems, I tend to fall. If it's an angry poem, I'm mad by the time I'm done reading it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks to all three of our poets, Marcus, James, and Matt. Other quick thank yous before we all go. Let's thank Left Bank Books. They got books for all three poets right out there for sale. Thank you to Missouri Humanities Council for letting us do this podcasting thing. You can look at yourself and see the back of your head if you want. Also, thanks to Aaron, Matt, and the Tavern for letting us do this for 6 months. And also, thank you for coming and helping be part of our 38 years of doing this. And lastly, we will see you on March 18th with Loosely Identified. See you next month.